April 27, 1978, 11:47 p.m. Francis Buchholz pressed his ear against the amplifier cabinet backstage at Nakano Sun Plaza, his engineer's mind calculating frequencies and decibel levels while 3,000 Japanese fans still screamed beyond the venue walls. The bass wasn't cutting through properly. He could feel it in his bones, hear it in the playback monitors, see it in the way the mixing board's VU meters barely flickered during his lowest notes. What Francis didn't know yet was that his next decision would accidentally create one of rock history's most legendary live albums and launch Scorpions into international stardom forever. But the real story of Tokyo Tapes began 6 months earlier, in a cramped rehearsal room in Hannover, when everything started falling apart. December 1977. Snow gathered thick against the windows of Scorpions' rehearsal space as Uli Jon Roth sat across from the band, his Fender Stratocaster resting silent against his knee. The guitarist who had defined Scorpions' early sound, who had merged prog rock sophistication with heavy metal power, was about to deliver news that would shatter everything they'd built. "I'm leaving after the next tour," Uli said quietly, his voice barely audible over the space heater rattling in the corner. "I've already decided." Francis felt the words hit like cold water. He and Uli had been friends since their Dawn Road days, when they were just teenagers dreaming of rock stardom in basement clubs. They'd merged their band with Rudolph's struggling Scorpions in 1973, creating something neither group could achieve alone. Now, after 5 albums and countless tours, Uli wanted out. "Klaus Meine," their voice sat forward. "Why? We're just starting to break through. Virgin Killer is selling in Japan. Taken by Force is getting radio play across Europe." Uli shook his head, long hair falling across his face. "That's exactly why I need to leave. This is becoming arena rock, stadium music. I want to explore, experiment, push boundaries. I feel like I'm playing the same riffs every night, just louder." Rudolf Schenker, the band's founder and driving force, stood up abruptly. "So we're supposed to start over? Find a new guitarist? Rebuild our entire sound?" "You won't be starting over," Uli replied. "You'll be becoming what you're meant to become, something I can't be part of." Francis said nothing, but his mind was already working. The mechanical engineering student in him understood systems, how changing one component affected the entire machine. Losing Uli wouldn't just mean finding a replacement guitarist, it would mean reimagining their entire musical identity. Herman Rarebel, who'd only joined the band the previous year, tapped his drumsticks nervously against his knee. "When?" "After Japan," Uli said. "I'll give you the Japanese tour. It's already booked, and I won't leave you hanging. But that's it." The room fell silent except for the heater's mechanical breathing and the distant sound of Hannover traffic through frosted windows. Francis looked around at his bandmates, these men who'd become his brothers over 5 years of shared dreams and disappointments, and realized everything was about to change. What none of them knew yet was that this crisis would force them to discover who they really were beneath Uli's towering musical presence. 3 months later, they were standing in Tokyo's neon-bright chaos, jet-lagged and overwhelmed, about to record what none of them knew would become their most important album. April 24, 1978, Narita Airport. The humidity hit them like a wall as they stepped off the plane, instruments and equipment cases creating a small mountain around their feet. Tokyo in 1978 was rock and roll's new frontier, a city where Western bands could find audiences hungry for the music their own countries were taking for granted. Francis adjusted the strap of his precision bass case and looked around at the organized chaos. Japanese efficiency was something his engineering mind could appreciate, but the sheer foreignness of everything, the signs in kanji, the rapid-fire conversations in a language that sounded like musical notation, the way even the airport announcements seemed to follow some rhythm he couldn't quite decode, left him feeling unmoored. The air itself felt different here, thicker, charged with an energy that Francis couldn't name. The smell of unfamiliar food mixed with exhaust and something floral, cherry blossoms maybe, though it was too late in the season for them. Everything moved with purpose but also with a patience that seemed impossible in such a crowded place. "This is it," Uli said quietly, lighting a cigarette as they waited for their equipment to clear customs. "My last tour." The words hung in the humid air between them. Francis wanted to say something, to argue, to convince his old friend to reconsider. Instead, he watched Japanese fans. Somehow they'd already found the band despite arriving on a Tuesday afternoon, gathering beyond the security barriers, holding handmade signs with carefully drawn Scorpions logos. "Look at that," Herman said, nodding toward the small crowd. "They know who we are." Klaus smiled. The the first genuine smile Francis had seen from their singer in weeks. Virgin Killer went top 40 here. Apparently we're bigger in Japan than we are in Germany. The bus ride to their hotel took them through streets that seemed designed by someone who'd never seen European cities. Neon signs climbed the sides of buildings like electric ivy, advertising products Francis couldn't identify in scripts he couldn't read. The urban density was overwhelming. Thousands of people moving through spaces that felt impossibly tight, yet somehow it all worked with mechanical precision. That night in their hotel in Shibuya, Francis couldn't sleep. The time difference had his circadian rhythm scrambled, but it was more than jet lag keeping him awake. Through the thin walls he could hear Tokyo breathing, the constant hum of traffic, the distant sound of karaoke bars, the electrical buzz of neon signs painting the night in colors that didn't exist in Hanover. He pulled out his bass, plugging in a small practice amp he'd brought, and began running through their set list. Each song carried the weight of the past 5 years, but also the uncertainty of what came next. When Uli left, would these songs still mean the same thing? Would they still sound like Scorpions? His fingers found the opening notes of Sails of Charon, one of Uli's compositions, and he played it softer than usual, almost like a lullaby. The bass line he'd learned so well suddenly felt foreign in this foreign city, as if the frequencies themselves needed translation. Outside, Tokyo kept humming its electric song, and Francis found himself trying to match its rhythm with his playing. There was something about this city's pulse that felt different from European cities, faster but also deeper, like a heartbeat amplified through concrete and steel. 2 days later, they were setting up equipment at Nakano Sun Plaza, and Francis realized they were about to capture magic they didn't even know they possessed. April 27, 1978, 6 p.m. The venue itself wasn't massive by arena rock standards. 2,000 seats, intimate enough that Francis could see individual faces in the front row from the stage. But something in the air felt different. The Japanese crew worked with precision that impressed even Francis's engineering sensibilities. Every cable routed perfectly, every microphone positioned with mathematical accuracy. The stage design was unlike anything they'd experienced in Europe. Japanese sound engineers had arranged the equipment with an attention to acoustics that Francis's engineering mind immediately recognized as superior. Every amplifier was positioned not just for convenience but for optimal sound dispersion. The mixing console looked like the control panel of a spacecraft, more sophisticated than anything they'd used in German studios. Dieter Dierks, their producer, was everywhere at once, checking levels, adjusting placement, his German precision meeting Japanese efficiency in a way that created something Francis hadn't experienced before. The sense that they were about to capture not just a performance but a moment. "This is Uli's farewell," Dieter said to Francis as they sound-checked. "Whatever we record tonight, it needs to be perfect. This lineup will never exist again." Francis nodded, but his attention was caught by something else. The bass sound coming through the monitors wasn't quite right. In the smaller German clubs they were used to, his precision bass cut through the mix with no problem. But here, with the more sophisticated recording setup, with Uli's lead guitar soaring higher than ever, his low end was getting lost. "The bass needs more presence," he told the sound engineer, a patient Japanese man named Tanaka who spoke careful English. Tanaka adjusted some EQ. Boosted the mids better, but still not right. "More?" Tanaka asked. Francis shook his head. "Different. Not louder, clearer, like it's coming from inside the listener's chest." Tanaka nodded thoughtfully, then did something Francis had never seen before. He walked out into the empty venue, positioning himself in different seats, having Francis play the same bass line from various spots while listening carefully to how the sound traveled through the room. "Japanese acoustics," Tanaka explained when he returned to the mixing desk. "We design rooms to make music breathe. Your bass, it needs to be foundation, but also melody. European mixing, you fight for space. Japanese mixing, you create space." For the next hour they worked on the sound, Francis's engineering background helping him communicate what he heard in his head, while Tanaka's expertise translated those ideas into frequencies and waveforms. It wasn't just about making the bass louder or softer, it was about making it occupy exactly the right sonic territory. Francis wasn't just playing bass lines, he was building the foundation that everything else stood on. If that foundation was shaky, the entire structure would collapse. But more than that, he was beginning to understand that in this acoustic environment, with this level of precision, the bass could do something it had never done before. It could lead without leading. It could support while defining. It could be the invisible force that made everything else possible. By 8 p.m. they'd found it. The bass sound that would define not just this recording but Scorpions' sound for the next decade. Deep enough to feel in your bones, clear enough to hear every note, powerful enough to carry Klaus's voice and Uli's soaring leads. But none of them knew yet that they'd accidentally created something revolutionary. The first set was electric. Japanese audiences, Francis discovered, listened differently than German crowds. Where German fans would cheer and shout throughout songs, these fans absorbed every note with intense concentration, then exploded into applause that seemed to shake the building's foundation. The silence between songs wasn't empty, it was full, charged with the memory of what had just happened and anticipation for what came next. Francis had never experienced anything like it. European audiences were passionate but impatient. These fans treated each song like a gift they wanted to unwrap completely before moving to the next one. During In Trance, Francis locked eyes with Herman, their rhythm section becoming a single heartbeat. 18 months they'd been playing together, and tonight everything was clicking with mechanical precision. Klaus's voice soared over Rudolf's rhythm guitar, while Uli painted melodies that seemed to hang in the air like neon traces. But it was during the break between sets that Francis made the discovery that would change everything. Backstage, Francis was checking his equipment when he noticed something in the playback monitors. The bass sound they'd spent so much time crafting wasn't just supporting the other instruments, it was creating space for them. Every note he played carved out frequency ranges that allowed Klaus's voice to sit perfectly, gave Uli's leads room to breathe, locked with Herman's kick drum in a way that made the entire band sound bigger than the sum of their parts. "This is it," he said to himself, though he didn't fully understand what it was yet. He pulled out a small notebook, the same one he used for engineering calculations, and started sketching frequency curves, trying to document what they'd accidentally discovered. If they could recreate this in the studio, if they could understand the science behind what was happening. Klaus appeared beside him, toweling sweat from his forehead. "That bass sound tonight, I've never heard my voice sit so well in a mix. What did you do?" "I think," Francis said slowly, "I stopped trying to fight for space and started creating it instead." The second set opened with Steam Rock Fever, and Francis felt something shift. Maybe it was the bass sound, maybe it was knowing this was Uli's last performance, maybe it was the way the Japanese audience seemed to hear every nuance. But something was happening that transcended the normal experience of live performance. They were creating something that would outlive this moment. During Robot Man, the closing song, Francis played the bass line that had been giving him trouble for months, a walking pattern that needed to support Rudolf's rhythm while creating melodic movement that complemented Uli's lead. Tonight, with the new sound set up, with the emotional weight of Uli's departure, with the precision of Japanese recording equipment, it became something else entirely. It became the foundation of everything Scorpions would become. When the last note faded and the crowd erupted, Francis looked across the stage at Uli, who was standing at the front, arms raised, taking in what they all knew was his final bow with the band. But Uli wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking back at Francis, a slight smile on his face. Later, Francis would realize what that smile meant. Uli knew they'd captured something special. More than that, he knew that Francis's obsession with getting the bass sound right had accidentally created the signature that would carry Scorpions to international stardom. 3 hours later, they were back in their hotel rooms, but Francis couldn't stop thinking about what they'd recorded. The bass sound that had seemed like such a small detail, the frequencies he'd spent an hour adjusting, the way Tanaka had helped him find exactly the right combination of power and clarity, had become the secret ingredient that made everything else possible. He sat by the window in his hotel room, looking out at Tokyo's electric landscape, and tried to process what had happened. In the distance, the city's neon heartbeat pulsed in rhythms that seemed almost musical. This wasn't just about one good show. They'd stumbled onto something that could change everything. He didn't know yet that Tokyo Tapes would chart internationally, that it would introduce Scorpions to audiences in America who'd never heard of German rock bands, that it would become the launching pad for albums like Love Drive and Animal Magnetism. He didn't know that the bass sound they'd discovered that night would become the foundation for Rock You Like a Hurricane and Still Loving You, songs that wouldn't exist for years but were already being born in the frequencies he'd carved out at Nakano Sun Plaza. What he did know, sitting in his Tokyo hotel room at 2 a.m., was that they'd found something. The 24-year-old mechanical engineering student who'd joined Scorpions to help pay for university had accidentally engineered the sound that would define arena rock. 6 months later, when Tokyo Tapes was released and started climbing charts in countries Scorpions had never visited, Francis received a letter from Uli, who was already deep into his solo career. "Francis," the letter read, I listened to the album last week. That bass sound, the one you spent forever getting right. That's the future of the band. I could never have been part of that future, but I'm glad I was there when you found it. Take care of our music." Francis kept that letter for the rest of his life. Because what happened at Nakano Sun Plaza on April 27, 1978, wasn't just Uli Jon Roth's farewell performance. It was the night a young bassist's engineering instincts accidentally created the sonic blueprint for one of rock's greatest success stories. The miracle wasn't in Tokyo's neon lights or the perfection of Japanese recording equipment. The miracle was in a 24-year-old bassist who refused to accept that the foundation wasn't strong enough, who spent hours crafting frequencies that would carry his bandmates' dreams across oceans and decades. Years later, when Scorpions were selling out stadiums worldwide, sound engineers would study Tokyo tapes to understand how such clarity and power had been achieved in a live recording. The secret wasn't in expensive equipment or studio tricks. It was in a young man's determination to build something that would last, one frequency at a time. The bass wasn't too quiet after all. It was exactly loud enough to launch Scorpions into legend.